As they got increasingly louder, the wizard lost his nerve and retreated to the main hall. The moans and growls were now so loud that everyone in the palace and perhaps the men outside could hear. Into the hall they came. What disgusting creatures were these? Legend had it that these things used to be people, but had been cursed by God many years past. Some of the older witches of Valnapopia believed these creatures to be demons. Whatever the case, releasing them was a very dangerous and desperate move. The sight of these things drew a hushed and terrible silence. The creatures stopped their growling and looked about them. The king's remaining guard, what was left of his fighting men, called into the hall by Oswald himself. He ordered his men to open the drawbridge immediately with the intention of sending forth these vile abominations to destroy his enemies. These things had served the will of tyrants down the ages. Would they serve this cruel king today? Men were about to bring the structure down when they were set upon by the dungeon beasts, who ripped at them with their hideous claws and shredded them with their reptile-like teeth. What a bloodbath it was! To the shock and disgust of the king, the creatures, animals or demons maybe, proceeded to tear out the guts of the men and eat them as starving wolves might devour a carcass. Most of the sorcerers fled the hall and went to hide in other parts of the palace. Some witches remained with their king. One from among these hags now began to shout at the demons. She demanded that they recognize Oswald as their sovereign master and obey her words. She spoke an incantation using the old tongue, which seemed to confuse the creatures somewhat. Loud thunder started to rumble outside without warning, as if a storm was right on top of them. A second rumble, this time accompanied by an earthquake, made the wall shake. The drawbridge lowered itself to the floor. What magic was this? King, the demons and the witches looked outside into the cold light of day. All was still. How could this be? Where was the storm? What happened next could surely not have been predicted by a single soul, not even the purple witch of the southern forest. Into the palace came, rushing, a band of red squirrels. The fearless rodents wasted no time in putting an epic beatdown on the dungeon beasts. The rodents burrowed into their enemies' skulls. The red warriors did rip out the throats of the demons, and they did dance a merry jig on their fallen bodies. What a glorious scene it was, children! The king and the remaining witches now fled up the stairs. Thaddeus and the commoner's army now entered the hall, where they were welcomed by their rodent comrades. The men could scarcely believe the horror that they looked upon in this unholy hall. It would stay with them for the rest of their days. Thaddeus then, rather dramatically, jumped up on a nearby table and told the men and the red squirrels that they must wait here. He told them that it was God's will he should fight Oswald one-on-one, man-to-man. His followers readily accepted this and wished him well as he climbed the staircase. Men and squirrels now made small talk, if you can imagine, as their champion searched for the despot. The palace was a vast building. Was the people's champion going to have to play hide and seek with Oswald the Cruel? There were so many rooms where he could be. Thaddeus slowly and carefully opened door number 1. It was merely a broom cupboard. He then opened a larger and more fancy-looking door, again with the utmost caution. This time he was surprised to find a young lady in sexual congress on a stately bed with several grubby gnomes. Thaddeus made his apologies and left. He walked down to the end of the corridor and turned right. He followed the passage right the way to where it opened up onto a grand balcony overlooking the royal gardens. What a beautiful sight, thought the brave stranger. He looked to the sky as he had earlier. He humbly asked the Almighty for guidance as he took in slow deep breaths and listened to the birds. The Queen could remain in her chambers no longer. Her daughter had by now driven Arabella to the brink of madness with her crying and whining. She had done her best to reassure and mother the girl. Arabella was quite sure Maria would be fine if she just stayed put and kept her mouth shut. So the time had come for act. The Queen struck her daughter across the face and shook her firmly, demanding that she get a grip and start behaving like a grown woman. Maria was shocked to silence by this and stood wide-eyed and fixed on her mother's authoritative stare. Arabella told her child to hide and be as quiet as a church mouse until all this was over. She shook her again to make sure she understood. Maria nodded and let out a feeble squeak of obedience before climbing inside the closet. Arabella took her leave and was greatly relieved to be out of that chamber, which had become like a prison. The Queen knew where her husband was going to be. She knew him only too well, and the only place she needed to be in the whole world was with the man to whom she had sworn love and loyalty to all those years ago. She took off her shoes and gracefully started down the corridor. Thaddeus the Brave remained where he was on the balcony, his eyes closed, aware now that someone stood behind him. A voice began, "So you are the outsider, the man who did slay my giant, the dog who would bring down my kingdom. Turn and taste my cold steel, foreigner." The leader of the common man turned and opened his eyes. He looked into the face of this aging criminal with contempt. The tyrant stood with sword drawn and grim determination written across his face. Thaddeus removed the dragon's tooth from his pocket and informed Oswald that he had used this tool to spill his son's guts on the field of battle. To the champion's surprise and disgust, the king smiled and thanked him for his service. The king did swing for Thaddeus's head, but our hero was able to duck out of the way. Oswald charged, as if to run the foreigner through, but Thaddeus leapt with cat-like agility over the tyrant. The brave Thaddeus then went for the kill, thrusting at the king with the dragon's tooth. It was the monarch's turn to skillfully dodge the blow. With Thaddeus exposed, the king delivered a brutal kick to the head, knocking our hero down. The king stood above the rabble-rouser, preparing to bring down his sword. As he did, Thaddeus gripped his lucky charm and prepared to strike the decisive blow. As fate would have it, neither sword nor dragon's tooth would win the fight. Arabella stuck her dagger between the neck and shoulder of Oswald, bringing a scream of disbelief from his royal highness. He staggered forward and fell against the balcony guardrail before turning to see that it was his queen who had at last betrayed him. He looked at Arabella, and with his last breath was able to label his former love a foul whore. What lovely final words. The queen turned to Thaddeus, and the two looked deeply into each other's eyes. Here he was, thought Arabella, the saviour of Valnapopia, the man who had ignited a revolution, the man who had lit a passion in me. The queen felt giddy like a young girl. Then, as if possessed, she threw her arms around the hero and began to kiss his face and neck. The queen was overcome. She kept repeating, thank you, kind sir, thank you." Thaddeus took in the moment with calm resolve. Maria did not do as Arabella had told her to. The queen could now see her daughter standing there as she continued to embrace Thaddeus, who had his back to the princess. "Mother," said Maria in a puzzled tone, but she was unable to answer her daughter as Thaddeus slid the dragon's tooth into Arabella's heart. The queen let out a gasp of horror and died almost instantly. The shocked eyes never left Maria's. The queen's body fell to the ground. The princess could not move if she wanted to. She could not think or feel anything. A strange energy had her in its grip. Thaddeus moved to embrace the girl and kissed her passionately on the mouth. A strong voice in his head reassured him that this path was righteous. Strong voices from below were inclined to agree. The brave hero then did take the crown from Oswald's head, and he did throw Maria over his shoulder before making his way back to the hall. Hopeful faces greeted him there. He held up the crown and dropped it to the floor as if performing a ritual. All the men and the squirrels therein did rejoice with thunderous applause, clapping and backslapping. Oswald had fallen. Freedom and glory to Valnapopia. Thaddeus told his loyal followers that the dark days were over. Dark magic had been lifted from this land, and God smiled upon his devout subjects here. Again the cheers went up. Common man's saviour took this moment to explain that the young lady over his shoulder would soon be his bride. Another cheer went up, but not so enthusiastically this time. From this time forward, he would be known as Thaddeus, High Commander of the free realm of Valnapopia. Maria would be his first lady, and a council of commoners would be appointed to advise on matters of state. The red squirrels would act as guardians of homeland security, should the forces of darkness rise again. The newly self-appointed High Commander and his followers went out into the open to take it all in. The sun was shining, and the sweet smell of freedom filled the air. Thaddeus finally put Maria down, who remained seemingly in a complete daze. From out of a nearby river came an enormous otter, at least 3 times the size of a man. He told the group his name was Terence, and that he would gladly take Thaddeus and Maria to the marble tower, where they would be wed, according to the traditions of Valnapopia. So the people's champion and his child bride-to-be were helped onto the otter's back. Terence was good to his word and did take the couple to the marble tower, where they were wed, a hamster performing the ceremony, as was tradition. After a couple of days in a woodland retreat, the first couple returned to the people and creatures of the land. Maria had by this time come out of her daze, and was fully aware of the horror that had previously unfolded, and the sexual violation she had recently been subjected to. On his return to the people, the champion informed the men and the creatures of the land that he and his wife would take up residence in what was Oswald's palace, which would now be known as the stately home of the Almighty's chosen one. Thaddeus was pleased to find that the men had cleaned the place up since he'd last been there. Presumably all the corpses had been buried or burned. The new ruler sent his wife to her chambers and went to sit on the balcony alone. He wondered what had happened to all the witches and wizards who had resided here before. He would ask the men later, of course. He watched the gnomes work the gardens with a lordly satisfaction. A voice spoke to him as the dusk approached. Surely this was the voice of God once more speaking to his humble servant. The Lord did then ask the High Commander some troubling questions. Could he trust his new wife truly and completely? Could he trust those red squirrels to remain loyal to his cause and holy message? And what of the people? He had done so much for them, but humans could be treacherous little things for sure. What if a foreigner should wander into these parts and hear tales of woe from idiots and drunks? What could he, master of the homeland, do about it?